Welcome to Monday Morning Dharma on September 30th, the last day of September. This made-up entity that we've decided to name the month of September, right? Why don't we go ahead and settle into a comfortable meditation posture? Using whichever method you find most effective, please allow both your physical body and your mind to start to settle and to rest, to become quiet and still. Now is not the time to reflect on events that have occurred in the past. Those events cannot be changed, undone, or recreated. Nor is this the time to speculate about events that may or may not occur in the future. The future is unknown to us at this time. Now is the time to be fully present here in this moment. Now is the time to give yourself full permission to enjoy engaging in a practice that's going to bring you a peaceful state of mind and at the same time contribute to your experiencing a peaceful world. We can now gently transition into meditation on the inner body. Please be the silent observer of sensations that may start in your hands and your feet in the form of a tingling, perhaps a lightness, perhaps a heaviness, perhaps a pulsation. No interpretation is necessary. No other forms of analysis are necessary. There's nothing to figure out. All that is asked of you is to rest and silently observe like a mountain with consciousness. A perfectly valid method of practicing this meditation is for you to observe sensations in so-called isolated parts of your body, your hands, your feet, the region of your chest, and so forth. Perhaps an even more valid method of practicing this meditation is for you to observe one universal sensation extending from the crown of your head to the tips of your fingers and the soles of your feet and all space in between. Whichever method of practice you choose to practice, please continue to silently observe. No judgment, no labeling, no speculation, no expectation. Through practicing this meditation, it may be that this entity known as physical body has disappeared. All that appears to the mind is an absence of body, an absence of physical body. This disappearance is quite important because physical body often is a component of this entity we've come to know as self. For most of us, physical body is an integral part of this made up idea called self. For the last moment or two of our meditation, please gently bring your awareness to the absence of physical body as you continue to meditate on the subtle inner body. Now, very gently, please redirect your awareness. Become aware again of the entity labeled physical body. Become aware again of bones, of blood, of internal organs, and so forth, and allow physical body to reappear. Please deepen your breath as you become aware again of the garments of clothing resting on the surface of physical body. Become aware again of your surroundings inside the room that you are occupying. Deeper and deeper breaths, and become aware again of the world that exists outside of the room that you are occupying. We dedicate all of the merit from this morning's meditation to world peace. May all beings without exception soon come to rest in a state of perfect, complete selflessness. May all beings without exception be completely free of all forms of emotional and physical suffering. May all beings without exception be happy, peaceful, contented, and free. Completely fill up your belly and lungs with air. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and bring your meditation to an end. Thank you and welcome back. So for the last several classes, we have been going through the chapter in Training in Tenderness, the book Training in Tenderness. We've been going over the chapter of clinging to the self, the root of all impediments, the root of all impediments to experiencing our sewa, our inner sewa, our heart of tenderness, our warm-heartedness. The illusory self is the root of all impediments to experiencing that sewa. And I think it's probably time for us to move on from this chapter. And I'm going to provide offer a just a review of what we've been talking about for the last several classes, and kind of going through the different steps through which we can come to recognize the illusory nature of self, also referred to as the I, also referred to in this context, ego. I think Freudian psychologists might have a different definition of ego and superego and all that stuff. Here, we're using the term ego synonymously with self. So, the first step is for us to recognize that there is for each of us a self. It's kind of paradoxical to explain and understand because, and confusing to understand because the self, this self that governs every single thing that we do and say, everything that we do and say is informed or governed by our self, our ego, our eyes, sort of like unconscious intent to protect and preserve and provide for ourself. It's funny. It's so omnipresent. This sense of self. It's so omnipresent that we're kind of oblivious to it. It's like breathing air, right? It's like air is an integral part of everything we do. It kind of all starts and stops with air, yet we never think about it, really. So it is with the sense of self. Everything that we do and say is governed by the self and wishing to protect self. It's a self-centered mode of existence. And I was asking myself this morning as I was preparing for our class, I was thinking, are there any exceptions to that? Are there any exceptions to everything that we do and say and think being informed by a self-centeredness? And I don't use that term pejoratively. I use it just as an objective statement. It's self-centered. And the one possible exception, and I would invite you guys to come up with your own examination, perform your own examination, see if you can identify any exceptions. The one exception that may exist that I kind of think about is parents' love for their children. Right? When it comes to children, parents' children, their own children, sort of like the welfare of other takes precedent over everything. You know, I was once told of a kind of a parable type story where a mother says to her daughter, I would die for you. Would you die for me? And the daughter says, no, I wouldn't, but I would die for my own daughter. And that's kind of a beautiful and powerful for me summation of a mother's and by extension fathers, parents' love for their children and the selflessness of that, the selflessness of that love. Anyways, before any before any work on awakening to the illusory nature of a self, the illusory self, before any progress can be made and further practice can be performed, there needs to be a recognition that the self is a thing. Okay, and sort of, yeah, just recognize that. The next step has to do with what we have been referring to as negating the object of observation, negating the self, the illusory self. And this is also kind of tricky for us to understand because what we do, the next step, this is really important, you guys, is that we have to go through a process of almost inflating or almost exaggerating our sense of self. Go through exercises that inflate our sense of self or exaggerate it so that it becomes so vivid and so front and center that it makes an impact on our mind. It's sort of like I tried to come up with an analogy. This may or may not be a good analogy. So, sorry, let me just back up. Come up with an inflated, exaggerated sense of self so that when we recognize that the self is an illusion, then it really makes an impact on our mind. It really gets our attention. We say, wow, wow, now I get it. Now I get how big and powerful and omnipresent and all governing for me this self is. I get it. The analogy I came up with is the existence of a Yeti in the Gila wilderness. A Yeti in the Gila wilderness, right? So what if we got this notion that there is a Yeti living in our backyard, not for you, Marilee, but for the rest of us who live in the area, in the Gila wilderness. And it's like, never heard about a Yeti, but I'm kind of a progressive thinker. I'll hold some space for that. And then we come to find out that there's a researcher, a person who is an expert on the Yeti that lives in the Gila wilderness, the Yeti that lives in the Gila wilderness. There's an expert researcher who has been tracking the Yeti and says, I have definitive, conclusive evidence that there's a Yeti in the Gila wilderness. There have been various sightings. We have photographs. We've gotten some hair off of a branch. And we've performed a DNA test on that hair, and we've determined absolutely conclusively that there is a Yeti living there. It's a thing. And we're like, wow, you got my attention now. Yeah, I'm on board with this idea of a Yeti in the Gila wilderness. And then sort of it leaks out. Somehow we find out that the researcher is a charlatan. He or she made it all up. And there's not really a Yeti there. And we're like, wow, I'm glad I know, but it's really interesting for me to look back at kind of how strongly I believed in the existence of the Yeti before it was ultimately refuted or what's the word? Negated. Before the Yeti, the existence of the Yeti was negated. Okay. We're going through the same thing in identifying this sense of self and getting a vivid experience or appreciation of that self. Remember us talking about the vividly appearing self, the vividly appearing I that comes up in certain situations, like when we've been embarrassed or when we've had the unfortunate experience of being the object of a surprise party. It's like you open the door and there are a bunch of people, surprise, and you're like, oh my gosh. Self appears very vividly. When we have been accused of a wrongdoing, even more vividly appearing is when we are wrongly accused of a wrongdoing. Self appears very vividly. And we talked most recently, examples that Dzigar Kongtrul used in the book Training in Tenderness. Like, so prominent is this sense of self in our lives that we come to regard, we've just sort of vaguely but steadily and strongly come to regard our sense of self as being a permanent entity, for it to be an autonomous entity. Permanent, autonomous, and independent. Our self doesn't need anything else to exist. So we've sort of like conditioned ourselves into thinking. And then when we come to recognize and understand, first conceptually, then experientially, when we come to understand that self is an illusion, it's a made-up idea, just like the Gila, similarly to the Yeti in the Gila wilderness, then we've got an attention. Then the process has got our attention. It's like, wow, I had really bought into this notion of an inherently existing, independent, autonomous, permanent self. And it turns out it's just an illusion. It's just an illusion. Then we can make some progress in moving from a place of self-centeredness to selflessness. When we recognize that there's not really a self there, then there's no basis for an entity, for a self to experience suffering. Then there's no basis for a self to take rebirth. If there's no self to take rebirth, we are up and off of the karmic wheel, and we spend the rest of eternity in pure consciousness, pure, blissful, pure consciousness, the nature of which is bliss. We're out of time. Last thing I'm going to say in this review is that we're not saying that there is nothing there. We're not saying that there is no self. That would be akin to saying that there is nothing there. What we're saying is that there's nothing really there, or nothing inherently there. There's not nothing there, but the thing that we think is there, or the thing that we've been conditioned to believe is there, is illusory. It's a made-up idea. It's a mistaken appearance to mind. Okay, you guys, that's it for the review. May you, for the rest of your lives, continue to refine and receive more clarity with regard to the sense of self and why it's so important to negate it, and continue to meditate on the absence of an inherently existing, intrinsically existing self, and thus move on the path to liberation from suffering. Okay, happy Monday. Have a great week, you guys.
You too, Jeff. Appreciate
Thanks.
it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. Bye-bye.